Ed Husic, welcome to Full Story.
Hi Nour, how are you?
The Australian government invited Isaac Herzog to visit after the Bondi attack. The Prime Minister says he looks forward to welcoming him to Australia, and the visit is intended to foster a sense of unity. Do you think it will do that?
I think it can be seen from a number of different perspectives. Let me start with just an initial one. I mean, I'm obviously very uncomfortable about this visit, largely because President Herzog has said some things that have attempted to sheet home responsibility for October 7 to an entire population. This had attracted the attention of the International Court of Justice, and you've got, obviously indictments from the International Criminal Court that are at play, and it's really hard for me to reconcile the vision of him signing bombs that went on to be dropped on Palestinian homes, to reconcile that vision with the notion of social cohesion. So from that perspective, I've obviously got deep concerns. However, I said to you that there are a number of perspectives or angles from which you could look at it. Mr. Herzog believes that he's been badly misrepresented by some of the things that I've reflected on. Where he has a chance to, and I remain open to it because I think we, at this time, need to all be peacemakers. If he has a view about how to chart a course for peace that can see Palestinians savour their own statehood, see an end to the violence, and obviously, they're very focused, the Netanyahu government, on the safety of Israelis, understandably. If that can all be reconciled in a way that shows that Mr. Herzog can be a leader in championing that, and he's going to use the visit to outline how he thinks peace can be brought about and that we can end the bloodshed and ensure that people have their own homes to live in, well, then let's see. I think really it's a moment that presents itself that he should seize. But in the absence of that, I just don't see how his visit, would add, given the concerns that exist around his positioning. And he's part of the leadership of a nation that has undertaken its conduct has failed to distinguish between civilian and combatant in devastating ways when you see the number of people that have been killed. And for me, and on this point, the hardest thing for me has been the impact on children. They should not be shouldering the burden for what happened on October 7, and we should have leaders be able to say that's not the way to go.
Okay, so you say you're uncomfortable about his visit. Was it a mistake for Australia to invite him?
I'm not going to couch it in those terms. I genuinely wish there was some other alternative that was explored. I guess as a member of the party, as a parliamentarian who represents Labor, I'm entitled to have a differing view, and my view is I don't think that this was a good decision, but it's going to happen. Nothing I can say about that is going to stop that. And I just think that people should be able to express a difference of opinion, but do so in a way that, given the sensitivities of our time that we're in at the moment, that we do it in a way that doesn't further divide Australians, but says there could have been a better way. And I think the better way is he wasn't invited, but that decision has been made.
Okay, there are people calling for his invitation to be rescinded. Clearly, you don't think that will happen. Others say that if he does arrive in Australia, then he should be investigated. Do you support calls for there to be an investigation by the AFP? People say that we have an obligation under international law to investigate Isaac Herzog.
I think, well, I as I said before, when I reflected on the comments that he made and the actions that he's taken, and the fact that there is an international tribunal that has focused on that is serious. Whether or not the AFP or others decide to investigate those issues, that will be to them. I certainly do not think that those international bodies should be frustrated in any attempt to investigate or hold responsible people that were killed through the course of October 7 and beyond. Hamas is absolutely accountable for its actions and should be held accountable for its actions. But the decisions made through the conduct of the campaign in Gaza are equally requiring accountability too. People that have made innocent sacrifice their lives, that they are targeted. This is simply wrong. And anyone who put innocent people in that position should be held accountable. And some of the debate that I noticed over the course of the last 12 months, Nour, about whether or not it was right to even indict Mr. Netanyahu, where does the buck stop ultimately? If the ICJ, if the ICC are making calls on that, I noted particularly from the coalition, they're expressing outrage that occurred. And my view is, well, if the coalition are big on law and order, they can't select what law or what order that they will adhere to. And I think there are serious issues that are at stake. The accountability needs to be held. And everyone involved, regardless of if it's Mr. Netanyahu, any of the other people that were involved in the campaign, anyone in Hamas that was responsible for October 7, they all must face accountability.
There are people who are saying they will protest, many protesting on Monday in opposition to Isaac Herzog's visit. Last year, you marched on the Harbour Bridge alongside two of your New South Wales state Labor colleagues. They say they'll be marching on Monday as part of these nationwide protests. Will you?
I'm in Canberra for parliamentary sittings, so obviously I can't be there. But on the issue, can I just reflect on the issue of marches? And you talked about the fact that I participated in the March for Humanity. I know post the horrific events of Bondi, a lot of things were said in a moment where there was a lot of fear and anger and grief. And so I didn't necessarily respond to everything at the time. I do think it's a massive slight against Australians who had genuine concern about what they were seeing in Gaza and who came out in record numbers, who have marched peacefully week in, week out to show the depth of their concern, that be linked to that horrific event we saw in Bondi. The ability for people to suggest that the March for Humanity led to the horror of Bondi is simply wrong and is a slur against in particular, when I marched, I saw a lot of Middle Australia out there on that bridge. And I reckon there were a lot of people there that had never taken part in a protest like that. And they did it because they were driven, similar to the concerns I expressed to you earlier, about the impact, especially on children, especially on women. The number of women and children that were killed as a result of the actions in Gaza were staggering. And people wanted to be able to say, we don't support this, and we expect that our government will speak up on this and that they'll work with the international community to stop this. And I just want to say for Australians that have expressed that concern, they should feel, that they should not have been marginalised in that way. They should not have been singled out in that way. I appreciate it was a horrendous time. People will say things in the heat of the moment. But now that we have an opportunity to calmly reflect on what's gone on, I think we should just be very clear that peaceful protest has a place in democracies, in particular, to be able to allow people to express their concern, for them to influence the decisions of government in a way that is peaceful and is designed with good public purpose, that there is a place for that in our society, and it should not be denigrated in the way I think was horrendously done so after the terror of December 14.
A couple of things I'd like to pick up on. If there are protests in Canberra out on the lawn outside Parliament House, will you join them on Monday?
I haven't contemplated that. I think I'm speaking up, quite frankly, with yourself right now in terms of my view about President Herzog's visit. We'll see what happens in terms of next week. I have participated in some of the activity that's happened before Parliament, and the hardest thing for me, Nour, was reading out the names of kids that had been killed through the course of what happened in Gaza. And I will always speak up where I think that, in particular, innocent people have been made a target of something that they should never have been. They have an entitlement, that they have a right to be able to live their life to the fullest and not have that taken away. I speak about those kids in Gaza. I was affected by the killing of 10-year-old Matilda at Bondi. They deserve to have a life rich with their own experiences. No one should have the right to take that away from them.
On the broader issue of protests, particularly in New South Wales, have you expressed your concerns to the state's Premier, Chris Minns, and do you have any concerns about efforts in New South Wales to ban slogans?
I haven't specifically spoken to the Premier about the recent changes. I've obviously, I don't go into the conversations I have with the Premier, but I do make the point to my New South Wales colleagues that there are people that are particularly concerned about what's happening in Gaza, and they're concerned especially, I've made the point, that there's an element of survivor guilt for a lot of people. A lot of people from that part of the world that have been able to start a life here and have seen what's happened to family and friends and have been impacted by the fact that they've sidestepped that gruesome reality in Gaza. There is a lot of that, and people feel the weight of that. And I've seen that in different communities through different conflicts in times past. And from an ethnic background myself, I'm fully aware of that. So I think it's important that people understand when people go out and protest. I would like to ask people consider when they use this phrase about importing conflict, which we hear quite a bit. There are a lot of people that they cannot be expected to turn up to Australia and then excise from their lives, completely forget who they are and where they came from. And the fact that they may have family and friends in that part of the world, they will never turn their back on people they care about, and nor should they be expected to. And if you accept that proposition, you also accept that people should be able to express a view that they're horrified about what's happening, they're anxious about what will happen to family and friends, and they want to know what their government's view is on that, and they will do that in a number of ways, which may include public protest, and that shouldn't be clamped down. And I don't think it's healthy. Equally, I think while people express their views, they should not do so in a way that incites hate or violence, correct? But at the same time, it shouldn't be assumed that just because they're protesting that it will lead to that. And it should also be understood that if people are prevented from protesting, then that creates that just basically captures pressure that will continue to build. And we don't need that. People need to be I think it's a healthy thing for people to be able to express their views, as long as they're doing it in a way that's not is, as I said before, inciting hate, inciting violence. And I think a lot of the protests that we have seen that have occurred week in, week out, you haven't seen evidence of that. You've certainly seen evidence with some of the other protests that have been organised by the far right, and you've seen evidence of that. But to equate the two simply is not sustainable on the basis of what we've seen.
I want to expand the conversation. Earlier this week, you delivered a speech that was about what you described as the scapegoating of entire communities. You are Muslim. You were the first MP to be sworn in on the Quran. How bothered have you been? How concerned have you been by some of the language being used by elected representatives in Parliament, particularly over recent weeks?
So I've been concerned about the rise of extremism for a while, and it crystallised post-Christchurch when we saw Australian white supremacists go to New Zealand and slaughter 51 people on the basis of being Muslim. And ASIO has charted that for 6 years, saying that they've been concerned about it. And post-Christchurch, I thought the exemplar in terms of response to a traumatic event like that was obviously Jacinda Ardern, who consoled and comforted, but also was prepared to take the steps to protect New Zealanders from the impact of that type of hate. And I think we need to be emulating that in the aftermath of Bondi, bringing people together. But I've seen some really deeply disturbing and quite contrary effort where we've been asked, especially by one side of politics and notably the opposition leader, say we needed to confront hard truths, and then talked about the role of radical Islamist extremism being responsible for all this, and then it sort of triggered, I think, nearly 90 different references to radical Islamic extremists, extremism, and also the reference to radical Islam. So a whole notion of radicalism attached to Islam itself. And I think people need to be very conscious of their words and conscious of we do not sheet home collective responsibility to entire communities for the actions of extremist individuals. Like that should be the notion that rallies us all together to go, we tackle the extremist element, but we don't blame the whole group. And we certainly then don't use that as a platform, for instance, as former Prime Minister Scott Morrison has suggested, that we accredit Islamic imams and that if they don't do it in some basis, they're deficient or suspect. I don't think that driving people into dark corners to nurture fear and grievance is a wise thing for modern democracies to be doing, and particularly democracies that want to be socially cohesive.
You suggested in your speech that Scott Morrison's suggestion would send us down the path of replicating an abominable chapter in history. What did you mean by that?
Well, there have been points in our world history where people have been singled out on the basis of their faith and forced to wear distinguishing features, armbands or whatever, as to what their faith was and who they were. And I thought we got beyond that. I thought we need to think through about, once we start down this path of, uncomfortable truths as it's been described, where are we headed? And the issue with the coalition is that they're only prepared to discuss uncomfortable truths if they're comfortable with the truths being discussed. I mean, they took umbrage, actually. It's important to note, when the ASIO Director General said that right-wing extremism was on the rise, the biggest thing that the coalition objected to was the fact that it was called right-wing, and they said you had to be careful about labels. But there's no care given by them when they label other people. And the reason I'm emphasising this, Nour, is because I think we need to be, as parliamentarians, focused on how we bring people together at this traumatic time. And everyone has a part to play, but particularly parliamentarians need to be conscious of the words that they use and the way that they have used that, the reason behind using those particular words, and be conscious about that, because that is not the way, and it's certainly not the way that Jacinda Ardern did it. And certainly Jacinda Ardern did not come on after a result of 51 of her citizens being killed in those two mosques in Christchurch. She didn't go onto Australian media and blame the Australian Prime Minister or the Australian government for what had occurred, unlike what we saw post-Bondi. I think the way we do it is that we work together to drive out hate, and we do that by standing as close as we can to each other to make that a reality.
Liberal MP Andrew Bragg went on to say that the Australian Muslim community has to take some responsibility for the behaviour of essentially terrorists who share their faith. There are an estimated 1 million Muslims in Australia. What is the social impact of comments like that? Have people reached out to you?
Well, I think people, I come back to the point. I mean, Senator Bragg is smarter than that. Look, I can't believe that a person would not be conscious of the impact of their words. So if that person is bright enough to know what they're saying, then they're saying it deliberately, and I think that's wrong, one. Two, as I reflected a few moments ago, and I think I dare say a lot of people listening to the podcast would agree, we don't blame entire communities for extremist individuals. We don't. And the suggestion that people endorse murder until they say that they don't, which is implicit in some of these statements. I mean, we've seen Andrew Hastie in times past make the point that, if I can get his quote, where he has said that the Australian Muslim leadership it's time for the Australian Muslim leadership to systematically and clearly make the case that Islam is a religion of peace. These are people who are senior figures in a major political party making those comments. How does that bring the country together, I wonder? That we need to have a better way of behaving, and I think people, Australian Muslims make a great contribution to our country and want to do so in a way that's peaceful and also recognises the opportunity that they've been given, particularly if they've made Australia a country of choice rather than birth. And there are people, Muslims of birth as well, that want to make the place better and leave something that's better than what they inherited. And I think we should focus on that more, and I think we should be bringing people together. And I'm not tarring all Liberals and Nationals with the same brush, because that's just as bad. But I do think I would urge them, and I'd urge everyone in the Parliament to recognise we can play a positive role in bringing people together while still taking a stand against terror.
We're having this conversation at a time where polls are suggesting that support for One Nation is on the rise. What do you think is leading people to seemingly embrace the politics of Pauline Hanson?
My initial response to that question would be that it reflects the chaos that exists in the coalition at the moment and the division that's there between the Liberal and National parties. And there's probably a shift away as a result, where people feel like they want a Conservative voice, but they are not satisfied that the Liberal and National parties can deliver that. I think the wrong lesson for the National Party in particular, that seemed energised and focused on the rise of One Nation, is for them to emulate or cosy up to One Nation. In fact, former senators of theirs, like Ron Boswell, identified early on that you needed to take them on. I think there are some definite lessons there, and there's definitely good advice there on it. As to whether or not it signals a deeper thing, I'll leave that for people who analyse these things to be able to examine that. But I think on its face, I think it reflects that division that is there.
Do you think there's a responsibility or a role for the government in curtailing that?
I think what we have sought to do is bring people together. I think we've recognised that people have gone through an exceptionally difficult, terrible chapter in our nation's history. And I think there's definitely a view within our camp about what we can do to bring communities together. Not everyone's going to agree. People think that you have to always be homogenous and absolutely uniform in your approach. I think different views are good if they're respectful and designed to move things forward in a sensible way. But I think that's where our big focus is. But it's been hard post Bondi. We missed the post Christchurch chance, Nour. We had that event. We needed to work out how to bring people together. And we just had this politicisation that I just think was wrong. We can get over this. It's not that it's set in stone, but I do think we need to take the moment of going, okay, what do we all do? What do we bring? And I've said this in Parliament. What do we bring to the table individually as parliamentarians? How are we going to bring people together? That is not. We have to be able to balance the hard and the soft here, right? Hard on terrorism, absolutely, and tough on that. But the element of softness is not weakness in terms of being able to console and bring people together. That is not weakness. And we should be able to emulate the way in which Jacinda Ardern responded to Christchurch and build a stronger nation as a result. I think that's the end game. That's what we need to focus on.
I wonder, you've spoken about Islamophobia throughout your political career. You've used your speech just this week in Parliament to say that anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and racism across the board need to be dealt with. I wonder whether you think things have gone backwards. It is something that people often tell me, that they feel that we're experiencing the levels of fear-mongering that we saw post 9/11. Do you agree?
I do. I do. I think we face a real challenge. I think it's inescapable. I know there's a tendency for politicians to always try and focus on the positive, and I understand the role in that. But I think we also have to be conscious of the fact that there is with the rise of far-right extremism, there is a drive on or a growth in racism that does need to be countered. We had someone throw a homemade bomb in a crowd in Perth on an Invasion Day march. It hardly made the media. So I think this is a mirror too to the way we respond to events like that. We have to hold that up. Politicians have a role, media has a role. as well. And I certainly think, I mean, obviously we've got some work being done in the anti-Semitism and Islamophobia space with the appointment of the envoys and the work that they've done, the special envoys they've done. I think we've got to get on with the work that has been done by the Human Rights Commission in saying we've got to have a very fast track that response, because I am genuinely concerned that, you know, I'm just going to say it. I reckon if the person who threw that bomb was brown or Muslim, we'd be having a different discussion. I just point blank think it would be different. And that's not good enough. I think anyone, I'm just going to say this, I don't care if they're Islamist or far-right extremist. I said this in the Parliament, I just want to restate it here. I don't care if they're Islamist or far-right extremist. If they pose a threat to the safety of our fellow Australians, that has to be confronted. And if racism nurtures, is a safe haven for that type of thinking to extend beyond the bounds of thought to action that presents a threat, that's serious. And there has to be a number of things. The tackling terrorism is not just about beefing up a national security presence. It's about attacking, dealing with the underlying conditions that are allowing people to think it's acceptable to move from thought to action. And so I think that's important as well.
Ed Husic, I really appreciate your time and for you joining us on a sitting day. Thank you.
Thank you.